Okay, history of the blues. This is one of my favorite topics, and I'm not an expert, but I've pulled together some really good information about this. It's amazing how the fusion developed something brand new in the world. Here's a little overview, and these topics are described better in the videos that you'll see below here. But here's basically the idea. This is kind of a recipe for what happened. You had African musical traditions and practices that were going on for hundreds of years and are still going on, as you'll see. Then you had European music, especially the Christian hymns, and using European harmony, like Johann Sebastian Bach, and what they call well-tempered scale, like notes that are mathematically separated from each other, which was really not necessarily happening in other music in the world. In fact, that was really a European thing. And then you had the slave experience of these people that were suffering, and they had a rich musical tradition to start with. And really the only thing they were allowed to do was sing and dance. That's all they could do as far as, mental health. So they had a lot to express. So those factors all together stir them up, and we got Afro-American music. And that means not just in the United States, but also what we call Latin music. So I'll just tell you quickly what's in this lesson. So this video is a really nice video talk. It's from 2010. It's a classic. It's just showing how music was really integrated in the daily life of African people, and still is. Really fascinating. This next one gives more of a sense of the richness and some of the variety and richness of the musical traditions and practices in Western Africa. So this would have been sort of like the musical culture that the Africans who later became slaves would have been coming from, what they would have grown up with. This thing about this instrument, the gonje, very interesting. Just the idea that, we think of music as having these set tones. What we call the scale. But what's interesting in this video is that you'll see that in Africa and other parts of the world, and also to this day, people are using instruments, and it's not necessarily, linked to a scale, la, 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 do, re, mi, fa, so, untuned or untempered. So this is an example of that, and that's important harmonically, because if you're coming from one of those traditions where they're not using a scale per se, and then you have this European scale, that's how they got these weird bended notes, like the blues note that doesn't actually fit into European harmony. It wasn't used in European harmony. Likewise with the beautiful Mbira, it's melodic, but it's not playing, what we call a tempered scale, like a mathematically separated scale, which was what we have, from European music, thanks to Johann Sebastian Bach. And speaking of Bach, he wrote a lot of church music, a lot of beautiful music. Martin Luther wrote, hymns. And this is great music as well. This is what the slaves would have been exposed to in their masters, from their masters. That's what their masters would have been singing on Sundays and teaching the slaves. So that was a very important ingredient. And then their slave experience. And that gave us North American, Central American, and South American music. So here's some examples. This first video, this person gives a really nice overview. I think this guy did this video as an assignment for a course, it sounds like. Did a great job. Gives a really good overview. This video really gives a sense, these guys are not slaves, but they're prisoners, and just gives you a sense of how they were using the call and response. You can hear the call and response. There's a leader and then everyone responding, and you can really hear the rhythmic thing. And the rhythm would have been integrated into pounding in with the hammers. They would do it in a rhythmic fashion just to get through their grueling day and their grueling life. Likewise with this one, you can really hear the feeling just really coming from their heart. those, that kind of the slave music and the church music later became more organized into groups that were associated with churches. This is from, I think, around the 1890s or so. You gradually had more professional groups. I think those are more from the 50s, and I'm skipping out ragtime and New Orleans jazz, but that's talked about very well in that earlier video there. And these professional groups were still covering gospel tunes. And right through the 60s, 70s, people were covering gospel tunes. Here's a really interesting example. This guy, O.V. Wright. This is his cover of Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, a gospel tune, I think from 1967. And then about 20 years later, you had Van Morrison covering it also. And people are covering these tunes to this very day. As I said, this is not just a United States thing. There's this whole parallel tradition of the slaves, that went to South America or the Caribbean, Cuba. There's also this huge, tradition of South American music. This video talks about that more from a Latin point of view and also gives a bit more background about the slave trade. So I hope you enjoy that, and I hope it gives you some inspiration to play from your heart. And whatever you're suffering with, let that be the substance of your song. See you in the next one.